Hi, I'm Sam. This is Lucas, JJ, Arian, and Doreen. We're looking at News on Sunday, News of the World. They're both there for different reasons, and we'll be looking at the performance and what we can learn. So, the history of the News on the World. They started in 1843 by John Bell, and it was the cheapest newspaper of its time, and they focused on giving people the truth. In 1891, Bell sold it to Henry Carr, and by 1920 they had 3 million copies sold, and they peaked in 1950 with 8 million copies. In 1969 it was bought by Rupert Murdoch, and he changed the paper dramatically into a tabloid. They focused on like scandals and like news on celebrities. By 2011 it won 4 British Press Awards, and the editor described it as the greatest newspaper in the world. But on the 10th of July, after 168 years, the last edition was published, and we actually have the last edition if you want to look at it.
Okay, I'm going to talk to you about the history of News on Sunday. It was born in the 1980s when Thatcher was Prime Minister in the UK. Thatcher was in government, and the Strong Death was following a strong anti-Thatcher movement. The idea of News on Sunday was to be the first strongly left-wing tabloid that was politic heavy, unlike all the tabloids at the moment like The Sun, The Independent, or The Sport. Alan Hayling, a Cambridge graduate and member of a communist faction called Big Flame, was the original founder of the newspaper. He had the idea of creating a newspaper that would represent the ideals of the left wing in England, but also accessible for the whole working class. This newspaper didn't really have to attack the right wing, but to show the other face of the argument not portrayed at the time. For doing so, he got in contact with many people from different backgrounds, such as workers in the Ford factory or journalists in Fleet Street in London. It was a £6.5 million project that required the support and investment from different bodies, such as the trade unions, local authorities, and different enterprises, such as the Cooperative Group and the Transport Workers Union, being this last one the biggest one with £500,000. Having the money required and the workforce primed, it was time to release the first issue. Before releasing the first issue, they released an advertising campaign with the slogan "No Teats but Love Balls" to try and differentiate themselves from other tabloids with pastry girls and weak stories. These had the opposite effect on the company, as they associated the newspaper with sexual identity found really wrong by the feminist journalists in the newspaper. These created a huge tension within the newspaper, and the slogan was changed to "The Paper That Bites Back." Now we're going to show you this first ad that was on TV.
In the end, News on Sunday settled for a watered-down version of the campaign. The TV ads, however, inexplicably featured references to the tits and balls of the defunct slogan.
Hello, gentlemen. I think it's true. So does News on Sunday. A new paper that's on our side. News on Sunday with football, snooker ball, tennis balls, hockey balls. In fact, pages and pages of sport. And it'll expose everything. Except girls on page 3. So, if you want the naked truth instead of naked women, read News on Sunday. This Sunday.
So it clearly made reference to the first love and notice by locals. Then Alan Hayling, the founder of the newspaper and considered one of the most important members in the company, left 2 weeks prior to the release of the first issue, as at that point the ideals and the nature of the newspaper had dramatically changed from the first idea. He described the first issue as terrible and disappointing, and didn't differentiate itself at all from the newspaper at the time. In order to break even, the newspaper had to sell 800,000 copies in the first issue. For the first issue, it sold 500,000 copies, and at the end of the first month, sales dropped down to 200,000. After that, the newspaper needed some more financial backing, and they got the help from the previous supporters to outlast the elections in 1997. But then again, Margaret Thatcher won the elections, and the newspaper went bankrupt. It was a £6.5 million failure, and the biggest failure in the journalistic history in the UK.
So now we'll look at success of News in the World. Initially it was successful as it was the cheapest of its kind, priced at 3 pence, which is £1.15 today. It was aimed at the working class, and it undercut all the other papers, leading to initial sales of 12,000 a week. It focused on shopping material, which had few other alternatives at the time. It was passed to the Carr family, and the success took off further. He had good knowledge of the UK newspaper market, as he already had his own Welsh paper called Western Mail. The managing director, George Riddle, used his knowledge of the market to reorganise distribution using local agents, and by 1912, 2 million copies were sold, which increased to 4 million in 1940. Rupert Murdoch acquired the paper in 1969, and Rupert Murdoch already had acquired loads of newspapers in Australia and New Zealand, so he also had good knowledge of the market. His senior members were well qualified and experienced, meaning that he had a really strong team. And the employees were also not only competent but really proud and loyal to the paper. And when it shut down, the editor said that it was a wonderful team of people and he was proud of what he'd done for the paper. It was also successful because there were loyal consumers. News of the World was the highest selling paper in the world, peaking at 8.5 million sales a week. They had strong consumer loyalty due to the paper knowing what to deliver. They knew the market well, and they knew they wanted scandals, crime, sex, and they also got involved in sport in 1903 as golf and darts competitions used their name, so they became really well known. The good knowledge of the market led to consumer loyalty, and that was one of the reasons they were successful. However, it was their desire to deliver the most scandalous stories that ultimately led to their failure, because the way they got the information in the end was unethical.
So now we're going to look at the failure of the News of the World. So News of the World has always focused on crime, vice, and sensation, and it's the unethical behavior carried out by this newspaper that which led the paper to fail. So in order to get the best headlines, the newspaper often used bribery. So for example, a reporter has claimed that journalists regularly made up stories and used unethical practice because of the cultural fear of this newspaper. And he told the BBC, for example, you can't get through the day on a tabloid newspaper if you don't lie, if you don't deceive, if you're not happy, if you're not prepared to use form of blackmail, extortion, or lean on people. You must have to deliver the story on time and on budget, because if you don't, you will get told off. And it has also been discovered that a 5 police officer has been paid £100,000 in order to get confidential information. There were also other kind of unethical practice used by the newspaper, such as phone hacking. So the investigation conducted from 2005 and 2011 appeared that the paper's phone activity were used on 4,000 people, including celebrities, politicians, and members of the British royal family. But in July 2011, it was revealed that the phone of a murder school Millie Dollar, relative to the British soldiers killed in Iraq and Afghanistan, and victim of the 7/7 bombing, have also been hacked. So after those full accusations, News of the World decided to shut down its production. And now we're going to show you a little clip of one of the relative to the 7/7 bombing that can illustrate one of the unethical practice used by this newspaper.
It's hard to imagine that at the lowest points of your life, you could get any lower, and then hearing that somebody may well have been listening to those very intimate conversations, and you realise that things can get lower. How people can get up in the morning and think that's a good idea for the sake of a story is beyond me.
And you can also notice on the graph that since 2005, sales has decreased because all the investigation that were made had a really negative impact on the newspaper and destroyed all of its credibility.
So now we're going to have a look at the failures of News on Sunday. There are several factors that are attributing to the failure of the newspaper. The main one probably being the lack of experience of the staff. So the firm used their workforce as an opportunity to display their left-wing ideals, their anti-racist, anti-sexist and pro-equality values. So they hired people of many different races, hired sort of half men, half women, people of different class and educational backgrounds. Now, this sounds good, but what it led to was a very ineffective and very mixed workforce, and many people ended up in jobs that they had no experience in. We've got a short clip here of some of significant members of the firm just talking about their roles in the firm.
Head of Personnel and Equal Opportunities.
And had you done that job anywhere before?
No.
Had you ever been foreign editor on a national paper?
I've never been foreign editor of any national newspaper.
Did you have any experience of working on a tabloid?
No, I've never worked on a national tabloid.
Had you ever worked on a tabloid before?
No.
And had you ever worked in personnel before?
No.
Had you ever been editor-in-chief of a national newspaper?
No.
Had you ever been sales director of a national newspaper?
Never.
Had you been the editor of a national newspaper before?
No.
You said you knew how to do spreadsheets, but you'd never actually worked within a company looking after finances of a company before in that way?
No.
So you'd never had a job in computing before?
No.
Had you actually had a job in marketing ever before?
No, because again, it's the sort of skill you pick up.
You became the chief executive.
I became the chief executive.
Was that a job you'd ever done before?
No.
So as you can see, the people in these positions weren't in minor roles. They were very significant positions in the firm. And the last person who just spoke was actually Alan Hayling, the founder and one of the most significant members, and he'd never done his job before. What this led to was a very broad workforce with many different views and different ideas about the direction of the company. And this led to tension and conflicts within the organisation about the direction and what should be included in the paper. Several dummy issues were drafted before the release of the first issue, and actually the one originally generated by the editors, the founders really didn't like, and it was completely different to what the idea that Alan Hayling had when he started the newspaper. So the result was a final product, the first issue, which just wasn't anything like what Alan Hayling was anticipating creating when he started the firm, and that resulted in the loss of sales after the first month. The first advertising campaign, also the no tits and lots of balls, which many women found to associate paper with a sexual connotation, really was horribly judged and led to a loss of popularity as well, and also that created more tension and conflict within the firm. So these factors can be generally attributed to management failures. There was no general leader, there was no figurehead. It was a committee-run organisation, with the committee being made up of founding members, investors, as well as editorial staff. This led to sort of no significant managing figure and no one really controlling the firm. Alan Hayling was kind of associated with being the figurehead, but he said himself he had no real control and no significance over any of the other committee members. This just led to the tension and conflicts becoming more and more of an issue, and no one really being able to take control of the direction of the newspaper. So the lack of strong management led to other of the poor decisions, such as the poorly judged advertising campaign and hiring inexperienced staff. Also, human resource management is an extremely important thing in every firm, but especially in a firm like this, where there are editors, founders and writers, all with different views and ideas, and who need to get their voice heard and need to be treated well in the firm. And this was just not taken care of in the News on Sunday, and that led to increased conflicts. It's led to people not getting heard, and writers falling out with the founders and investors of the firm.
So what can we learn from the failure of the News of the World? Because of the unethical ways newspapers used to get the information and the news itself provided to the public, which caused the crisis of the confidence in the society, we can realize how management thinking the leader have about business and ethics translates into behavior in the workplace. Let's see an example of what Murdoch think about ethics. Once Bruce Gallery, the actor of Sydney Morning Herald, asked Murdoch about ethics. Murdoch called him a wanker. Bruce thinks that Murdoch saw ethics, or even discussion of ethics, as an inconvenience that got in the way of newspaper business. If we go back to the history of the News of the World, we can see actually it has much stronger leadership than compared with the News of the Sunday. Because of this, such strong message Murdoch gave demonstrated to other leaders and managers in the organization directly. So we are extremely unlikely would explore issues like ethics or managerial accountability. Instead, most of them had to follow what the leader says, which can bring them higher position in the job. At the same time, philosophical issues about management, leadership, and the kind of business they want to run for the consumers, employees, and society would neither be considered. so as augmenting of an organization we can get with such kind of leadership that whatever it takes to deliver shareholders' value, no matter what cost to people involved in the process. The leaders, as a result, in any company needs to be responsible to ethics of the public, set a good example to employees, and then lead the organization on the right track. The second point is CSR, corporate social responsibility. It is a strategy that involves business in actions which will bring positive effect in the society. In the first edition of News of the World in 1843, there was a sentence saying, "Our motto is the truth, and our practice is the fearless advocacy of the truth." If it cannot translate in action, it is simply a slogan. The News of the World scandal indicates the importance of CSR for the stakeholders. If an organization ignores it, for example, the newspaper involved in hacking phones of individuals and allegedly bribing the police. So organization will not only suffer a massive financial loss, but also the loss of reputation. As a popular tabloid, it needs to be a balance of transparency and privacy, especially dealing with the sensitive members of the society, such as minors, that girl we talked before, who has been murdered, and victims of crime. As a result, there needs to be a certain kind of discretion to decide whether the exploit will cause more harm than good to the public, to avoid similar tactics other newspapers may have to gain information.
So in all the examples that I've shown you in the previous slides, it can show like a lack of preoccupation by the last owner, Rupert Murdoch, and that proves that self-regulation was bound to fail. And this can be an example of the kill or be killed culture. Because for Rupert Murdoch, the more scandals the story were, the better. But how they were obtained was like, he was not really much concerned how the stories were obtained. And to conclude, we can say that ethical behavior were mostly shaped by leadership, rules, and values, but in this case, they all failed. Because values were abandoned, rules and law ignored, and leadership provided no guidance. So it all reflects a result at any cost. And after 168 years of publication, the newspaper published its last edition.
So this brings us on to whether News on Sunday was too ethical in its way it was run. So there was a very diverse workforce, and that was completely intentional. However, I believe that that it was a more political decision to hire many people of different races, different genders, and from different backgrounds to work for the firm. So it wasn't an entirely ethically based decision. It was more political in order to differentiate themselves from other newspapers and tabloids, as well as to promote their left-wing ideas and make them seem like accessible to the working class. So I believe it was more a political mistake than an overemphasis on ethics, which is again based on the management decision that the committee came up with to hire these people, and eventually led to the failure of the firm. So quickly to summarise, so the News of the World failed basically because of a lack of ethics, and the use of phone hacking and misconduct towards the subjects of the stories that they were getting. Whereas the failure of the News on Sunday can be more attributed to the poor management decisions and the lack of effective leadership. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, if you want to grab a seat for a couple of minutes or so, sit down. Groups, if we can come up with some questions now for group 4. Thank you. So 2 questions for group 2.